Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My military position is a Vice Rector for Military Affairs and International Relations, Colonel Kozarowski, Associate Professor of our university, you know. And today I have an honor to invite you, Professor Markus Kerber. Professor is a representative of the Technicznego University in Berlin, and Professor will give us a paper directly connected with his scientific abilities. Sir, the floor is yours. Please.
Dziękuję bardzo. Dzień dobry, Polsku. Proszę się nie obawiać, nie będę długażła odczytu po polsku. Będę kontynuować w języku angielskim. Dobrze? Thank you very much for having the occasion on this very special day for German and for the Polish as well to talk to you in this wonderful place in the presence of so important, courageous and highly qualified soldiers as you are. This is for me a great honor, a great privilege, and I'm very, very grateful. You make me, and I think all the German nation, a great honor to invite me on this very special day. That's why I have found in my cupboards an old suit which I tailor-made 25 years ago in Poland, here in Warsaw, Moda Polska. This is a compliment for Moda Polska, but it's a compliment as well for the man who's fit by it. It's a little straight, but it still fits. Arms procurement and cooperation in Central Europe. We are facing a situation which is characterized by features which you all know. The financial need, the technological gap between Europe and the United States, and the need, the absolute need for further military integration, which is impossible if we don't come to terms on common equipment, on common logistics, and of course, on common doctrine. Frau Rusak, kann ich ein Glas Wasser haben? I would like to give you a very, very short assessment of the situation as I see this. First of all, I'm extremely attached to European identity, defense identity, but the European defense identity not being opposed to a defense identity of the United States. I'm very transatlantic minded, and if I'm looking as an economist, as a lawyer, for cooperations in the field of arms procurement and cooperation in Europe in general and Central Europe in particular, this is not against the Americans. It is in order to compensate the pitfalls of Europe in comparison to the United States of America. Because in the United States of America, you have one budget, you have one administration, you have one army, and from time to time there is a little arbitrage between the naval forces and the land army and the air force, which is difficult. But in Germany, in Europe, we have 27 nations of very incomparable size, and unfortunately it's very difficult to come to terms and to decide as quickly. So the question of arms procurement and cooperation in Central Europe is existential for the combativeness, for the intervention, for the capacity of European armies to be a good partner to the United States of America. Let us note, however, in numbers of soldiers, Europe is not far behind the US forces. But in terms of fighting power is a term which has been created by the great Dutch Israeli historian Martin von Krefeld, in terms of fighting power, we are far behind. And as far as the amount of investment in defense research is concerned, well, Europe is in a different world. We are simply not in the first league. We are somewhere else. We recognize more and more that we have to concentrate, to pool our resources. And this is not only necessary in order to modernize those armies which are very close to unsecured borders, or uncertain borders at least, this is the case of the Polish army. But this is as well the case in projects where the military use is at first glance not the first usage. Let me give you an example of a project where the necessity of cooperation is essential and existential for the project itself. The German army still uses GPS, and everybody is very happy with that, unless the US army says, well, we have no time. So we create Galileo. And although we create Galileo for civil purposes as a system of navigation satellites, the military usage is, at least in my back mind, very much. Nobody in Europe, I say nobody, neither Germany, nor the United Kingdom, nor France, nor Poland, could develop Galileo on its own. If Europe is made for something, well, projects like Galileo are extremely useful. A glass. Glass. Okay. Doesn't matter. Galileo is a very, very difficult birth. It started as an experiment. And whenever you start something like an experiment, you do it for the first time. There have been many, many changes in the project. But nevertheless, this is a project where everybody recognizes that without doing it together, it would not exist. Because neither one of the big nations nor smaller nations would be financially be able to afford it. And navigation is essential. We cannot do military operations without navigation. The navigation capacity or capabilities is an essential facility for successful military operations, as has been proved in our experience in Afghanistan. Let me give you another example where cooperation becomes very apparent and where we can come or are getting closer to a very important concept of European cooperations. It's interdependence. What do we understand by that? Well, Germany and France, historic rivals and political competitors, have two different concepts of reconnaissance. France is very much driving optical reconnaissance through Helios. As you know, from time to time you have cloudy weather or you need reconnaissance results in the night. Then optical reconnaissance isn't very useful, at least it's not sufficient. So you need radar reconnaissance. Germany is very strong in the technology of radar reconnaissance. You always need two things at the same time to match the demands of military operations. You can't do without one another. Needless to tell you that when cooperation between France and Germany in the field of reconnaissance was pioneered, they both started their operations on their own in their field. Helios was set up, Saarlupe, the German radar satellite, was set up, and then later on, both sides found out, that it would be useful in the common interest, that the French reconnaissance officers have access to Saarlupe information, or the information generated by Saarlupe, and that the German soldiers have access to reconnaissance results by Helios. Well, it's not needless, I hope it's useful to tell you that these satellite systems, which cost roughly about 300 million each, Helios on one hand and Saarlupe on the other hand, had to be rearmed, had to be retrofitted for another 70 million euros simply to enable French soldiers to have access to Saarloupe and German soldiers to have access to Helios. Very, very expensive. If this had been planned before, and if we had come to the idea of accepting interdependence and accepting sharing common knowledge, it would have been less difficult. So, to come to the first conclusion, military cooperation and cooperation in the field of technology and procurement is not luxury. It's not an add-on, as I said. It is a necessity. It's either you do it and you try to organize not only military but technological cooperation, or you are out, because even as significant countries as France and Germany would not have been able to give the full operational coverage of reconnaissance as necessary in the fielding experience. For the time being, that cooperation is focused on projects, because we don't have one single procurement agency in Europe. Some in France say we need one big single procurement agency. Well, I don't want to bother you with the idea of whether this is sensible or not. I'm a pragmatic man, preferring realpolitik, and I say it isn't there, so we have to come to a step-by-step approach and do with what we have. And the particular role of the procurement agencies, as I see it, critically, nevertheless, will be delineated to you a little later on. I want to underline again the idea of accepting interdependence, of accepting giving up part of your sovereignty, because you don't really give up anything. When Germany gave up the exclusive access to Saarloupe, to the radar reconnaissance, this was not something which made Germany sovereign in the field of reconnaissance, because they needed Helios for the optical reconnaissance, and France vice versa. So accepting interdependence is only a way of paying tribute to, well, the lack of critical size of our old European nations, when even the bigger ones, as Germany and France, don't have neither the budget nor the economic size to cover all systems and all capabilities. You have to share capabilities and accept partial give up of sovereignty and partial interdependence. This is so important, and then I come to what I call the military competitive edge about technology, because technology in our age is a new code word for sovereignty. Our French friends, as I said to Prorector in the very warm reception you gave me before coming to discuss with you, technology and defense technology is considered in France as technology of sovereignty. The French nation is extremely concerned about its sovereignty. But even France will not be able, in the years ahead, to build a certain number of systems on her own. Now we are in the second phase of Helios, and they are already asking the Bundeswehr, the German armed forces, whether the third optical satellite couldn't perhaps be bought or procured by Germany to come to some sort of pooling. So if we don't accept interdependence, if we don't give up a national procurement, we are going to isolate ourselves, and we will experience the pitfalls of the limited size of our nation states and the limited budgets, which are, like it or not, uncomparable to the United States. We have a severe drop in the defense budget of the United States of America, but this is still unbelievably in another league and on another level than what we can spend in Europe. So technology in general and defense technology in particular are a key element for the operational superiority, the operational capacities of our armed forces. And we have to come very quickly here, as technology is extremely expensive to generate, to not only sharing capabilities and pooling certain parts of our armies, but of sharing the generation of that technology. Let me make one critical remark on technology, which I consider a key element for the ability of Europe to voice its opinion in the world, in world affairs. Superiority in technology is useful. It doesn't solve all problems. The operational conduct of American forces reveals, and I could give you a few examples in our discussion, the great temptation of believing merely in technology and in the superiority of technology. And that's why the focus in the United States of America is of gaining, wherever possible, the lead in terms of technology. This is misleading, tempting, and dangerous, although I appreciate the Americans very much. They are loyal allies and essential for the security in Europe and for Germany. This is misleading and might lead into the wrong direction, because for two reasons. Firstly, because you recourse, or you have a regular preferential recourse to solving political problems by military technology. And secondly, believing that even if you face a military opponent, superiority in technology gives you always the lead and gives you the certainty of victory. And unfortunately, the United States have experienced several cases, and the French army as well, where superiority in technology has not given the upper hand in the military and the political contract, as was the case for France and Algeria, as was the case for the United States in Vietnam. What does the importance of technology mean now for Europe? Well, let us be blunt, frank, open, honest. In terms of military technology, we have a two-class society in Europe. We have on one hand the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, to a certain degree Poland, catching up very quickly. Courageously, you've become member of the European Space Organization, but still lagging a little bit behind. This is one part. And the rest of members of the European community are simply not in that club, because they don't have significant investments in military research. If you don't do investment in military research, then you are simply not in the right league. This is due to many, many reasons. Well, I don't want to be so impolite or blunt to mention names, but the size of certain states simply doesn't enable these states to spend on more than the symbolic presence of an army. So the question is, how can we commonly increase spending on military research? How can we commonly spend more on research in general? The protection of our battle tanks, the protection of armored vehicles does not only depend on military technology, it depends on protection technology. Protection technology is part of a civil technology. If you iron or you protect the transporter of money for a bank, you have to use the same technology, or about the same technology, as you have to use when protecting a battle tank. At least in essential terms, this is about the same problem. Unless we increase our effort in that field, the gap in terms of military technology between Europe and the United States will even become greater. And we have to come to terms and to find forms in order to coordinate the research in these fields. The question is not if or if not, the question is how and how much. Because every nation is extremely attached to having its national technology policy. In France, as a matter of example, 600 million euros are spent, and 80% of the money is spent on some big state-owned corporations. It's the right hand of the state that gives to the left hand of the state the money. And they are not even very proud of it. If you measure the outcome of that military research, it is less, much less, compared to the 300 million Germany spends on military research, because it's spent all over the branch of military technology with many, many, many small corporations. Many, many small corporations. This is a very characteristic of German industry. I might remind you of the fact that a little drone, a little tactical drone, you all know, you're supposed to know, Luna, was developed by a very small company. I was in the Einsatzführungskommando, in the head of conducts, military conducts in Potsdam, when this was, the military need was articulated, and the big corporations were not interested because the turnover was not big enough. And then we asked a small corporation in Bavaria to develop it. And in the meantime, it has become really something very operational, which is selling very well. So, technology is key. Organizing research is very important, and for Poland, I would say the parameters of action and the reconnaissance you have within the club, let us say the upper league of military nations in Europe, depends very much on whether you have access to the technology club. Access will not be for free, but Poland is again a very prosperous nation, and I'm extremely, with growth rates we envy you of, and I'm hopeful that you will join that club to have a very constructive element within the nations who do or concentrate on significant military research. We are, in a way, at what we call in German Epochenwende, a turnaround of a period. Because however the ambition, the military ambition may be, none of the big nations, the former colonial empires like France or Great Britain, can go on developing certain complex systems only for their own needs. And that is why what we call Systemfähigkeit, the capacity to create systems on your own, will diminish year by year. Germany is still able to build frigates. In the field of missiles, the country is less sovereign. In the submarine field, we are absolutely sovereign and leading. In the field of armor vehicles, we are great. We have different competitors, even in Germany. But in the field of flying systems, combat jets, Germany no longer has that capacity. In France, you have still the capacity for nuclear submarines, and as an annex to that, no nuke submarines. You have the capacity to create nationwide combat jets, but even if there is a next generation of combat jets after Rafale, it will not be developed by France on her own, simply because it costs too much money. So we are at a turning point of military history, of military procurement. And as an economist, I tell you, what we could and what we have to quantify is the cost of national autonomy and compare it to the cost, we'll come to that a little later, the cost of cooperation. The cost of cooperation is something we are going to discuss a little later on, but we know already, without being able to quantify this, the cost of national autonomy. You have no economies of scale because the numbers you produce are insufficient. And you have always to integrate in your national need, the national needs for the national requirement needs, you have to either to change them or to adapt them to export strategy. So no economies of scale are possible if you remain in your national isolation. If you remain in your national isolation, the national defense industry is getting more or less what I call a Soviet structure. It becomes or remains a national corporation doing business with the National Procurement Agency, doing business with the national army. It's a very incestuous circle. And the only thing which is going up are costs. Because if the supply side is organized by the state, and if the demand side is organized by the state, this is an unbeatable monopoly. I can give you rampant examples of what Soviet economy is like in Western countries. That might amaze you. I give you an example. In Cherbourg, you have DCN, the French direction of naval shipyards. It's 100% owned by the state, with only a minority shareholder, Thales, which is dominated as well by the state. Yeah. There is no longer any use for the security of France to have nuclear submarines. They cost in production, they cost in maintenance a hell of money. The nuclear component, the naval nuclear component in the French defense budget is nevertheless a taboo. Why? Not because the military doctrine in France says we need nuclear submarines, but because we have many, many laborers in Cherbourg building nuclear submarines. And the Lord Mayor of Cherbourg was the Minister of European Affairs, and now he's the Minister of the Budget, and he will protect that sector. Yeah? So this is the underside of national autonomy. It creates unproductive monopoly structures in the own country which produce costs, enormous costs, and which makes armament industries totally uncontrollable. DCN is a state within the state. And I tell you, the management of DCN, the management and the owners of DCN, they are all united in the defense of vested interests. The state, as a client of arms procurement, of arms equipment, loses a perimeter of action if the state is at the same time the owner of its own industry. So as you quite clearly hear, I don't like monopolies, except one, the monopoly of the army. So the question is not so much if and how, if we come to a common procurement effort, but how we organize this and how we can come to a rational comparison between the costs of national autonomy and the costs of European cooperation. We have, if we come to European procurement, either by national cooperation or by European procurement agencies, to overcome many, many difficulties. First of all, the vested national prerogatives, the rights of the nation state in defining and procuring and finally maintaining an arms system. No longer defining military requirements on your own is no doubt a pill you have to swallow. It's really a bitter pill. Secondly, the employment interests. I gave you an example of Cherbourg. I could give you the same because I don't want to expose myself to the suspicion of being nationally biased. I could give you the same example for Manching, which is the great center of German air industry. They will do whatever they can in order to maintain their job structure and their supply structure there. And I could imagine that you have similar problems of vested interests here in Poland. the problem of the tension between European procurement, defining, procuring, maintaining on a European level, are still totally unsolved, even in those corporations which are, by definition, supranational. The best example is EADS, the aeronautic group. EADS is a German, French, Spanish corporation with a common shareholder structure which has been recently reshaped, but that has not solved the problem of inside fighting between the different industrial sites. What do I mean by that? Within the group of EADS, you have advocates who make the plea for this or that product, let us say A400M. And then the battle starts. Who is going to make the development? What part of the aeroplane is going to be developed by which industrial site? What will be developed in Toulouse? What will be developed or at least produced in Hamburg, Finkenwerder? And what will be left to the Spanish? And this is only the beginning of the battle, because if it turns out to be difficult, as was the case for A380 or for A380 and more for A400M, then everybody finds fault with the other one. For the French, the Germans were responsible for certain technical mismatch, and for the Germans, the French were responsible. So the idea that we can overcome the problems of European procurement by simply creating European companies is an error, in my opinion, a great error, because EADS is a dysfunctioning corporation, and the inside battle, I would even say war, of vested interests is waging. So if you have, in the Galileo project, there is a heavy war between the French side and the German side, who is going to be the leader of the project. So it was decided that the German side was leader of the project for Galileo. The German side EADS made a terrible offer in terms of technology, in terms of price. They lost it. They lost it to a medium-sized firm. Everybody underestimated. A German firm was the great surprise. And after that, there was inside fighting. Who is in charge of that? So I don't think that corporations, European-wide corporations, with very complex shareholder structures will solve the problems, the operational problems of common procurement. Because procurement is not only an academic problem, it should serve you. Yeah, you are waiting for equipment. You need equipment with certain specific practical requirements, and you don't get it very quickly. And when you get it, you don't need it any longer. At least this is my experience with the German army. So, having said all this, I will come to the costs of common procurement and the forms of common procurement, or what I called in my structure the pitfalls of common procurement. First of all, let me remind you of an important revolution which has taken place in Brussels. The European Commission, together with the European Parliament, have decided to elaborate what they call a defense package. And although Article 346 of the European Treaty allows the nation states to organize national procurement on its own, the European Commission, together with the Parliament and the Council, have created a defense package which, in principle, has decided that all significant procurement measures have to be object of a public offer. So we try to overcome the fragmentation of the national procurement markets, and if Germany has the intention to procure herself with a new battle tank, then there must be a public offer. While the defense package is the rule and public offer is the rule, but what is more important than the rule is the exception. And in the defense package, in the regulation, you have many you have many exceptions. So I don't expect a European procurement market to be truly European and open within the next 10 years. But the directive, the regulation, has to be transformed into national procurement law. And this is at least a certain step forward in opening markets and in stopping the state doing business between left hand and right hand, in as much as the armament companies are nationalized. Well, let us be very, very concrete and talk about a few points which are difficult in the field of common procurement. First of all, no doubt, the definition process is longer. And the definition process is not only longer and takes therefore more time, but it is accompanied with many, many hidden misunderstandings, open or hidden misunderstandings. A400M is a good example of hidden misunderstandings. Everybody from a certain point on in the definition process said, okay, that's it. We don't go too much any longer in the detail. And the French side said, well, we don't need all these specific requirements the Germans need. And the Germans said, well, if they think they don't need them now, we will show them in the course of that project that we need them. You know the follow-up of that story. The French said, rightly, we need a pre-development project because A400M is too complex to procure by simply a commercial approach. And the project as such passed the German parliament by saying, well, this is just A380 in a military version. So the definition process is a key problem. If we don't get in that field a sense of compromise and more authority by the soldiers, then we leave this to the national engineers. If you put into one room of, let us say, 5 nations, delegations of engineers, they will have endless discussions on which is the best solutions. And they totally lose out of sight your operational needs. From time to time, you have the impression that they build the frigate, they build the aeroplane, they build the drone, or they create an armored vehicle simply for them, to prove that they have the best solution. And the solution is French, German, Italian, Spanish. But it's not a Spanish a national solution. It's a technological proposal. So we have to tame the engineers and bring them back to the military needs which they have to fulfill. This is a very, very important point, because the national procurement agencies, not only in Germany, not only in France, are no longer agencies, they are principles. They are conceived as agencies, offering engineering knowledge to the soldiers to take a procurement decision, such as an architect you need in order to build a house. No, they have become the principle of a complex process. They determine the beginning of the process, they determine the execution of the process, and they determine when finally the equipment you have been waiting for quite some time is going to be delivered. So this problem of principle and agents, which is not specific to European procurement, is or has to be solved very, very quickly. It is legitimate to recourse to engineering expertise, but it's illegitimate to confuse the function of national procurement agencies being more principles than agencies themselves. This requires perhaps the greatest effort And you have to identify within the national procurement agencies not only people being bilingual, polyglot, open-minded, but being extremely attached to certain projects, to certain common projects. Unless you find these people, you will keep the European Defence Agency on the level we have. It's a nice club of experts. They have a nice chat, but they will never give birth to a project. They do a little research, they do a little study, but they are not capable and willing to come up with a real military project. A particular program, a particular special problem in organizing common procurement is a common understanding on the role of the three phases: development, preparation for production, and production itself. At least in Germany, as well in France, you always have these three phases unless you buy from the shelves. And after each phases, you give a certificate of whether the development has been achieved. If the development has not been achieved, there's not going to be a pre-production phase or preparation for production. Opinions differ whether developments have been achieved, whether they have been substantially achieved. And they differ nation-wise, and they differ from engineer to engineer. And the leadership of engineers in this particular field and the indispensability of engineers in this field is a great hindrance not only to efficient procurement, but as well to a Europeanization of procurement. Because we can't do without them, unfortunately. How have we overcome that difficulty in Germany? Or how have we tried to overcome? I made my inaugural address as a young professor in 2001 at Technicznego University in Berlin on the topic, a radical proposal for the reform of procurement. So all my faculty was astounded because such a politically incorrect topic. And I still remain very close to the idea I brought to you. I will give you some of my the memorandums I made in those days. And the idea I developed in order to limit, to tame procurement agencies is very simple. If you buy a car, you don't call an agent in order to buy for you a car. You go to a car dealer. So the best thing is that the client himself has full command and responsibility of the process. This is the idea, the principal idea. The principal idea is this of fiscal equivalence, the identity of buyer and user, of procurer and user. And that's why we have in Germany, finally, 10 years afterwards, enormously reinforced the responsibility of the military personnel. The procurement agency in Germany is no longer a civil engineering club. It is a system of combined forces, and 50% of the personnel of the staff will come from soldiers. Well, we will see whether in practice this will work, but an important revolutionary step has been made in order to make procurement more efficient. If ever we focus or concentrate on European procurement projects, I give you a few examples later on, we have to have such a common agency where military staff takes the lead and is not dominated by engineer, and together they try to simplify the procurement and planning process. Otherwise, and I know this from my experience as a reserve officer, you can spend months, years in the defining phase. Because after having done this, you have no longer any responsibility. Well, how can we, after having laid bare the necessity of common procurement by these perhaps a little bit provocative words, how can we make an important step forward? Well, we have a framework in the European Treaty. It's a framework of enhanced cooperation, including at least 9 countries. Well, 9 countries is a legal minimum. I think we can start as well for certain projects. Look around the Baltic Sea with 5 or 6 countries that will do, who combine their forces in the field of naval needs. And I think the European Commission has pardoned so many illegal cases, they will pardon such a case as well. So enhanced cooperation is the legal framework within which common procurement project-wise can take place. So my belief is that we don't need and we won't get a common European agency very quickly, but we have to proceed by projects and by allotments, budgetary allotments to that particular project. I hope at least that this is possible. If I say budgetary allotments, then instead of common funding, I mean that every nation state interested in the development of one project makes a special funding according to the role, according to the importance, according to his own order. So there should be no misunderstanding. Common or cooperative procurement does not allow free riding. Those who say, I want to have a ticket in a club, I want to have a ticket within a special project, and I get this for free, this is not the right approach. As Milton Friedman said, there is nothing like a free lunch. And this would create the wrong incentives. Well, let me give you, to summarize, a few examples of European corporations and what we can learn from that. And I talk to you less as an academic scholar than as a practitioner. The need for armored vehicles became apparent in the 90s. Everybody was talking about armored vehicles. I don't mention major battle tanks, but armored vehicles. And we had a wonderful tripartite project, which was then called the GTK, or the Light Armored Vehicle. The tripartite project was between the UK, France, and Germany. The story of this project is a story of a total failure, and it's worth looking at it. At the very beginning of that project, and I was following it very closely on the side of an industrial firm in France, there was the common statement, the common belief that European forces would have to substitute at least 5,000 to 10,000 armored vehicles. Having today a market of 5,000 to 10,000 armored vehicles offers you an enormous economy of scale, because the price per unit is comparably less than producing 600 or 1,500 vehicles. So this was the perspective. Well, I was very closely following this project in the final phase of 1998, when there was a very fierce discussion between the German side and the French side of how the protection was worked out. This fierce technological discussion covered a total misunderstanding about the operational concept of GTK. Later, that became the Boxer. The French, fully legitimate, wanted to have a light armored vehicle for command operations very close to the front. They were keen on mobility instead of full protection. And they wanted a combat vehicle rather than a transport vehicle. The Germans wanted to have protected space to transport troops, up to 16 soldiers. Accordingly, their technical specifications were not totally, but fairly different from each other. And nobody was willing to talk frankly to the other side. There were caretaker wars, proxy wars, engineer battles, trying to convince the other side that that sort of protection is better than the other ones. Finally, in end 1998, France left the project after having fully absorbed all the technological incrementals of the research which has been done so far. The national firm in France, GIA, today Nexter, owned by the state 100%, had a special project already ready, presented it to the defense minister, and the defense minister said, we are going to make a fake competition, but you're going to have it. Full stop. That was called in those days Vextra. Today it's called VBCI, Véhicule Blindé de Combat d'Infanterie. But this is not the important thing. The important thing is that France only ordered 600 vehicles, which makes the price per unit incomparably higher compared to the economies of scale we had in mind. Later on, Great Britain left, and Germany found herself once again on her own and had to find an ally for that project, and struggled to keep the project, which was interesting. It is a very interesting technological invention. It's a modular composition of the vehicle, made by, in my opinion, one of the best engineers. It's not a cheap thing, but it's a good thing. And they found the Dutch allies. And finally, the Dutch were willing to step in. End of the story. Germany ordered 200 exemplaries. So the idea of having thousands of lightly armored vehicles with a unit price being extremely competitive, making this product an interesting product, beefed up or beefed down for export, turned out to be an illusion. So we cannot afford things of that kind. And that's why it is extremely important to use the very rare chances of common development when these chances come. The light armored vehicle was a chance. There was a common need in almost all land armies in Europe. We had the same constellation a few years ago, about 10 years ago, for the frigate program. And you will see that my national bias is extremely limited. The French developed a frigate, Horizon, quite good, I must admit, and they wanted Germany to join. And of course, Germany and the German shipyard industry wanted to make its own development. And they convinced finally the German Navy to create a special design, which is called Fregatte 125, Frigate 125, which from the very beginning was extremely special. A ship which could be maintained, maintenance works on the sea, partly on sea, which could be used by two teams. So a very innovative thing, but certainly not for export. So Germany decided not to join the French program, created its own program for 4 frigates. You can imagine that the overhead costs of 4 frigates and the overhead costs, the research and development costs for 4 frigates are incomparably more important than for 10, 15 or 20 frigates. So this is my message here. We have to transform the European Defense Agency into an instance which identifies military needs, which tries to see whether the needs are, in a way, the timetable, the time schedule is comparable. Because there is no, if France needs a frigate and Germany doesn't need, and needs something 2 or 3 years later, that is not very helpful. So if there are common military needs, we have to bring them into the same schedule and then have an open discussion about the costs of non-cooperation. No member of parliament in Germany, no member of the budget committee has refused to take note of the memorandum I made about the costs of non-cooperation in the field of frigates. Because the Frigate 125 project turns out to be the most expensive frigate which we have ever had. And we had before, in the form of frigate 124, already something technologically very sophisticated, but extremely expensive. Extremely expensive. So this was the example of GTK. This was my common message to find common military needs. I have already talked to you about Saarlupe, the reconnaissance competence. This is a field which is not only very instructive in as much as Germany and France is concerned, but it might give you an idea of how European procurement could develop even for smaller nations, having the ambition not to depend, in as much as information is concerned, on the members of the five bigs. In a system, a complex system of a reconnaissance satellite, you can have a system, a ground station, some satellites, then a system which controls, verifies, validates the images. Then you have vertical integration. Or Luxembourg or even Austria are not interested to have the system. They only want to have a certain amount of pictures. Or they want to be in the showroom to take a look at that. Because most of the photos we get are used in order to identify fakes we get from big brothers. Yeah? So we can offer in the field of reconnaissance satellites very subtle forms of cooperations which do not encompass the whole system, but which give access for a limited amount of money to sharing technological sovereignty, sharing technological facilities. Well, finally, I come back to the example I mentioned at the very beginning. Cooperation in the Baltic Sea is a necessity. This is really, for me, a proof of what we can do together. I think the technological needs of the Polish Navy have been discussed in the press. There are great, there's a great awareness even in Sweden, an important country and with great naval tradition, very cooperative. And I would say that cooperation for a common procurement effort, a common technology policy, and a common doctrine for the Baltic Sea either emerges or we are not able to give common procurement a real chance. But this is something we can perhaps discuss later on today. Thank you very much indeed.
So, sir and ladies and gentlemen, let's start currently a question session. Okay, and our student will ask you, sir, could you answer? The floor is yours, again, as I said.
I'm Dr. Korinia from Institute of Logistics. First of all, thank you very much for this very fruitful lecture. It was very interesting for me, and I have few questions, if of course I can tell you these questions. First of all, you have mentioned a lot of obstacles in cooperation within European Union states. I'm very interested in your point of view. Which obstacle is main, more important, most important? This is the first question. Because you have mentioned that this is a problem about sovereignty, it's a problem with work division, this is a problem with requirements and so on. And the second question is, can we have cooperation with the United States on equal level or with equal chance for this cooperation? Because experience is very pure, especially if you look on the cooperation between British and Americans. I think about Hercules and future large aircraft. This was very bad experience. So can we, as European states, have, let's say, equal chance in cooperation with the United States? And if I can, the last one question. As lecturer in defense economics, I'm very interested, are these problems presented by you are reflected in your German defense economics? Thank you very much.
Shall I wait for more?
Yes, of course, sir. The idea is the questions, answers, and for the next people who will ask the professor. Jens, could you give the very short questions because we don't have too much time? Could you take it into consideration? Doctor, you too, but you are free currently. Sir, the time is for you. Could you answer, please?
Yeah. I will try to answer very briefly because you cannot answer a question exhaustively without exhausting the audience. The greatest obstacles are two, in my opinion. First of all, money. Yeah? Because there's a great misunderstanding that corporations is a way of muddling through, of getting something without paying. Yeah? This is a major misunderstanding. Yeah? And in most corporation projects, well, financing is the key question. Yeah? And in many cases, cooperation is argued by those who don't want to pay. Yeah? So, second question, or the second problem is the national procurement agencies. Because the national procurement agencies, in as much as they remain agencies without soldiers, well, in Italy you have only soldiers, but they live there on their own planet. Yeah? And why should they give up that monopoly? They are a key factor on the demand side. They have a wonderful position. They say yes or no. Or even if they don't say no, they can say yes, but we have to explore this. We have to have a post-design phase. We have to check it. And you cannot do without them. Because if you want to make sure that a certain armored protection is bulletproofed, well, you need them. So these two elements are, in my opinion, the major obstacles. So will we ever get European-minded armament engineers, or will we get, as I favor, and I did my best at the joint of Chief of Staff Academy in Hamburg to educate people like this, will we get soldiers being interested in armament? Yeah? Then you need people who do at least one job 5 years and don't skip from one intervention to the other, because to get experience in armament you need 5 years minimum. So my plea is, let us put those people in charge who have to use the arms. Yeah? Let us buy the car, let the driver buy the car. I want to put the soldier into the driver's seat. Yeah? And the engineers into an additional, and to use the engineering knowledge you have in the army. We have in Germany lots of engineers, yeah? And we have to use their engineering knowledge to enhance, accelerate, and optimize the procurement process. But there is more than that. You need a certain European spirit, because You have to give a kick to a certain project. And if you always count pennies, that won't work out. So this kick is this European kick is, how can we get the kick out of us? Secondly, well, the equal chances, cooperation with the USA. Well, this is a very, very a dramatic chapter. On one hand, we are all transatlantic minded. We can't do without the United States, but the United States are a closed shop. It's always upside down. It's a one-way traffic. American eyes only, Buy American Act. And if you talk to the armament attaché of the German embassy in Washington, he can give you novels of interesting stories of protectionism. So now the United States have made, again, not a very original proposal to create a transatlantic armament market. I don't think they really want. I don't think so. But we have to accept this and to discuss it. Because their budgets are shrinking. And shrinking budgets are good, are very good. Not good for the army, but good for the managers and for the people who are in favor of efficiency. So I think we have to create a transatlantic armament market very quickly. The CEO of British Airways, or British Aerospace, holds a number of affiliates in the United States. He doesn't even have the right to have access to these venues, or to these firms, because it's for American eyes only. He is the shareholder, but he doesn't really know what happens there. So if the Americans want to play the transatlantic game, okay, then we have to be earnest, and we can only do this if we strengthen our defense effort Europe-wide, without any pacifist temptation, which I preach my own country in that field, and secondly, to be united and not to let each other be divided by the Americans, because they give us, everybody, a little sugar. For the missile defense, you know this. This is a very important project for Poland, and well, we see what's going to be the outcome. We can't do with American technology in that field, but I think Europe has to adopt a common approach without taking an anti-American approach. This is the difficulty. Because the French always say, well, let us be united, let us be European. To be anti-American. I'm not anti-American. I want to serve my own interests. So if they say for American eyes only, I would say for European eyes only, which is silly. So we have to create a community of defense within NATO. The European weight must become bigger. Other questions?
Thank you. Tomasz Szatkowski, I'm a think tanker and expert on national security issues. Sir, it was indeed a fascinating lecture. My question, my first question is, how much do you think the lack of convergence and unity in European procurement might be attributed to the fact that there is a lack of a genuine convergence of national interest in terms of the perception of threats? Because my feeling is that we're entering a period where there is a growing regionalization of defense policies and of perception of threats. This is one thing, and second question would be following. You've mentioned that there should be a bigger role of the military people in the procurement process.
Yeah.
And but then certainly there is a drawback to the role of the engineers, which you mentioned. However, military people might also have their certain drawbacks. I mean, well, military people come from certain environments, from certain services, which have their own cultures. So maybe the whole process should be driven by And it's not because I want to please you, but maybe the whole process should be driven rather by economists or managers rather than engineers and military people. Thank you.
Thank you for that very thought-provoking intervention. You quite rightly focus our attention on the key point. We have still a very national perception of threats and a very national perception of what armed forces are used for. In the discussion on the white paper, the white book in France, I met several people being in the commission. And, well, there are first and three main objects: protecting France by nuclear force. Why? No answer. It's a dogma. It's a dogma. Not rationally, there is no menace which you can fight by nuclear arms. It's only to be in the club of nuclearly armed of nations. Secondly, protecting France outre-mer, overseas. To protect, do you need a navy of 50,000 people to protect little islands in the Comorans? Yeah. Thirdly, protecting French interests in Africa. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to comment too much on French policy, but none of these things, none of these perceived threats and security instruments are shared by Germany. And I don't want to go into detail into French policy in Africa. It is the contrary of what German policy in Africa is. So, you are right in posing this problem. But there are real threats. Poland is, your border on the east is, well, hopefully certain, but hopefully secure. But it's a historic experience that the border moved. So, I think you are quite legitimate in having a special perception of your threats. Germany has a special perception of threats. Germany doesn't feel threatened by nobody. This comes from the wishful thinking that we are surrounded by friends. So I think we should go away from the idea of being threatened. There are threats in France which do no longer exist. That's why they invent nuclear deterrence in order to fight a threat which, in my opinion, is an illusion. And it costs the French taxpayer a lot of money. Let them do. And secondly, you have real threats. And then you have technological developments where you have to be in. Either you are in or you are out. And one of these technological developments is space. The American armed forces have a space department. They have developed a special strategy for space. So either we converge our forces and sit together and to make a catalog of what is called space awareness, or we don't have the critical size. Denmark on its own will not have a space strategy. It's either to be in the club, to be in the leading technological group, or to be out, to be not only in the second league, but out. And Europe has, in these particular fields, to converge. And if there is not conversion by common threat, fortunately the Soviet Union does no longer exist, then there is a conversion by common interest. By common interest. And the common interest is either we do it together, or we are out. And there are special technological trains, either we step on, either we get on, or we will no longer have that option to go into. If you compare the effort, even the intellectual effort the Americans do to develop a space doctrine, we are lagging behind. And this would be a very good place to develop a European space doctrine. We can learn a lot from the Americans in that field. And we do not lack the brains, but we lack the political support in that field. This is, intellectually speaking, you're a member of a think tank. It's a challenging thing. It's very thought-provoking to read all this. And then, secondly, you need space instruments. But that would lead, again, into very technological items which I think I don't have the right to discuss here. But again, this would be a good place to develop a European space doctrine.
Thank you very much for this answer. Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, but because of the time pressure, it was the last question. And sorry, sir, but it was the last answer concerning this paper. Because of our agenda and the next point, in 10 minutes we will take our professor for the next place and next point of visit. So, sir, thank you very much for very impressive, very interesting paper. I think that plenty of us, they are students of the operational and especially strategic studies. They are officers. For us it was very, very interesting. And so, sir, I hope that we'll be able to have occasion to meet each other, maybe in the next papers, in the next cycle. Thank you very much for the paper. Special thanks for the staff of the Management and Command faculty for the preparing of this Forum of Defense. Thank you. Have a nice time today. Thank you.